The new major release for Databricks extension for Visual Studio Code, version 2, is now available. So Dustin Vanoy here, and I created this video to help with how do we get through the initial setup and the main ways that you will need to run code using the VS Code extension. This also includes how we can deploy resources using this extension. So let's start with why would you use the Visual Studio Code extension, or really any IDE with your Databricks environment. So when you're doing local development, you might want to use a local development environment that you're really comfortable with. So VS Code has many features that developers like, and they may be used to using, all the shortcuts to jump from file to file, might be used to how you use the visual git commit editor, things like that that are really comfortable for a developer who doesn't really want to change their ways to work with Databricks. Now, another thing is that with VS Code extension and with some of the other IDEs, we could actually have Databricks related code like our Apache Spark steps be run against a cluster in Databricks. So we can still get better scaling that we get from running on a Spark cluster. We also get access to data that's not local, data that's available through Unity Catalog on Databricks. And so we're able to then test things closer to how they will run in production, maybe at scale if we need to, all while working from our local development environment, such as VS Code. So in addition, with this extension, now we can deploy, develop, and run our Databricks asset bundles from the extension. So the goal is really to ease the development process. And if you need to do things like run jobs on Databricks, you don't necessarily have to switch to the workspace in order to do that. Now let's discuss some reasons why you may choose not to use the Databricks VS Code extension, instead use the Databricks workspace for development. So number one reason I'd say is that Databricks notebooks are actually really easy to use. They're easy to collaborate on. When you're working with Databricks notebooks within the workspace, you also have access to a Databricks assistant, which can be very useful for generating code and for diagnosing errors. In addition, the editor in the workspace now has debug capabilities built in. It has good Git repository connectivity. And so there's a lot of capabilities there that if you haven't tried it lately, go check it out. There's been some new experiences rolled out. And in addition, even like the Python file editor, not even a Databricks notebook experience, has come a long way. You can do options like jump to where the code's been defined from a single Python file. But these are all subjects that are worthy of a demo in a separate session. I won't go into how great the editor is and the workspace is. Let's take a look deeper into how do we get set up and how do we work with the VS Code extension. So let's dive into how you get the latest extension and some of the options you have to run it with your code. Before I dive into the demo hands-on portion, just a quick call out that there is a blog that Databricks has posted that calls out some of the big improvements of this extension. And so the setup is simplified. That is my number one reason I've been sort of telling some people to start using this when it comes out, is I think it just gives you an easier way to get your environment set up, get Databricks Connect. You'll see that in this video. In addition, it can improve the inner dev loop as you work on being able to actually define your jobs in a way that can be deployed and run in multiple environments, make it easier to do the next steps of integrating it with a CI/CD deployment tool like Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions. And so a lot to be offered from this extension. We'll see a little bit of it in action here, and definitely check the documentation, go try it out in order to get a full feel of if this is the right fit for you. Often though, just a heads up, often I'd say a part of a team, maybe like the more data engineering heavy focused people on a team, will like to use something like an IDE like VS Code, and another portion of the team will prefer developing with notebooks. They might be using a lot of Python libraries that are developed by that data engineering team. So it's not bad. It's completely cool to have some people working from the local extension, some from VS Code. All of the syncing and merging of development that happens across your workspace and happens locally is going to happen through your Git repository anyway. And so you'll still use normal practices to commit things to Git, push them up to whatever your provider is, and then merge code together to make sure that everything is merged and ready together for deployment. You're not relying on the syncing process that we use to do your actual deployments and to merge together separate developer code bases. All right, with that, let's dive into the install and hands-on experience. Here's a quick view of Visual Studio Code with the extension enabled on version 1. You can see the extension options, have a certain look and feel that you may or may not have used before. Instead of focusing on this, let's jump to what it looks like when I do a fresh install of this environment with the version 2 extension, and that'll explain all the functionality you need to know. Okay, so I'm here in VS Code, and in this case, I've tried to clean up anything from the prior version of the install so we can get like a fresh look at the Databricks extension. So I'll go ahead and find the Databricks extension. And it'll just be called Databricks IDE support. We'll go ahead and install the Databricks extension. Notice that at the time of recording, 2.4.2 is the version that's available. Once it's done, you can go ahead and start using it. To be extra safe, you might want to go and restart Visual Studio Code to make sure you don't hit any problems. As I jump into it, right now I have nothing really connected and open, and so it gives me the choice to create a new Databricks project, which is fine. Let's go ahead and open a folder and then we'll start to work with it. So I'm going to open an empty project that I got started. So now I have an actual folder mapped already, but still nothing's going on. So when I come back here, it's going to give me the choice, because I'm already in a folder, to either migrate that folder or create a new Databricks project. Before I do that, let's go ahead and add a Python file and show how it looks a little bit different without the Databricks connectivity set up. So if I go to File, we'll just say new file, Python, and give it a quick name like example. So we'll paste some code into this. We can go ahead and wrap this at some point to make it a little bit easier to read. There we go. That's a little better. Okay, that file's saved. Because I have the extension, even though I haven't really set up anything yet with asset bundles, I can see a few things are different. Mostly it's important to know that this Run on Databricks button is now here. But because I haven't added anything else, it's all grayed out. The other thing to note is that down at the bottom right, I have my base install of Python 3.11. So as I continue, let's go ahead and say that we want to migrate this folder to a Databricks project. What this means is that instead of possibly following a template and creating some examples and an example bundle to work from and build into my own code, I'm just going to get a very simple Databricks.yaml to add a bundle, because this version of the extension works with bundles primarily. So from here, I can choose from existing profiles and say I want to make my bundle use this host. I have two options because I have two profiles in there. I'll go ahead and just create a new profile. We'll call this one dev2. Okay, as this is happening, it's going to get me logged into Databricks with OAuth, and it's going to create something for me so that I can use Databricks bundle and start to build this out the way that we're meant to. So we can see that the next step is to actually make sure it's selected that profile correctly. So when I click here, dev2 got created. It actually does map to my bundle appropriately. And when I select it, it should show up now. So now I'm on that workspace. It's got credentials. Now I have a couple things to do. Select a cluster and set up the right Python environment. Let's start with this view of selecting a cluster and look at a few things that are possible here. So whether or not you've ever used the Databricks extension in VS Code, we'll see that I've connected to a cluster. This cluster is running already. And then before I go getting an environment that is recognized and fits the criteria here, I can actually try to go, and because I have a Python file, I have a few different options under the Databricks run. So notice how our regular run looks like you would expect in VS Code. The Databricks one, slightly different. So for a Python file, I can upload and run the file. Now it is going to sync what is in this directory to my workspace, to the bundle location. That bundle location was automatically configured based on the Databricks.yaml file that was generated when I said that I want to migrate this project. So this Databricks.yaml was new. You probably saw it, an empty folder when I started this. And it has a host that it found in my Databricks host file. You might have had to populate this if you didn't have anything in your Databricks profile. It's defaulted to a dev target with a mode of development, which is good. That's what I want to work with, and I can change the bundle name at any time if I want to. All right, so that file has been, things have been synced to the workspace. That file has been run and the output's actually printed here in my debug console. So I was able to connect in my workspace and run this. Because I did upload and run file option, it actually ran every bit of code in this on the Databricks workspace, like on the cluster. None of this ran locally. In a similar idea, I can choose run file as workflow, which is another way to upload and run on the workspace. In this case, it's actually going to create a one-time workflow run, and that job run is available in the job history on the workspace if I want to go view it later. So it just tracks a little more history, gives you that job monitoring experience if you go take a look at it on the workspace. So as that completes, I can see the output in this view rather than in my output of my terminal down at the bottom. And so a few stats around it, and I could go look at it in the actual workspace if I chose to. So that was to run file as workflow. The other option I have will take a little bit more setup. So I could try to either run with Databricks Connect or debug with Databricks Connect. Let's see what happens if I choose either of these options. We'll go with run for now because I haven't set any breakpoints. So it's going to prompt me to pick a virtual environment. Even though I've got Python 3.11 selected, which is the appropriate version for this cluster I'm using, it's going to say that I need to have a virtual environment. It's possible this will change in future versions, or that we'll just get a more clear message about why it's popping this up. But I highly recommend you have a virtual environment, whether that's through VMs or Conda. That's a good idea to have a virtual environment. So let's go ahead and go through this process. We need to pick which version our virtual environment will be based on. And so we want to use 3.11 in this case. And my new virtual environment gets created right here. And it gets created with the name .vn by default. And it gets created with whatever version I just clicked on when I was creating it. It's going to prompt me here that I can install Databricks Connect, which is a good idea. I could either do that right here, because really what I just tried to do requires Databricks Connect as well. I could do that right here. I can do some things like changing version. Let me show you the other way you can install it, is going back to the extension UI. Notice that now it gives me a check that I've met its requirements for an active virtual environment. And I can do install Databricks Connect right here. And it's going to basically take me to the same kind of prompt. Let's just go ahead and install whatever the default is for my current configuration. So I can see it defaulted to 13.3. Honestly, I probably want a higher version than that unless I'm working with the cluster 13.3. So feel free to upgrade that. You can either choose the version in that last step that I went with the default, or just by clicking on configure, you can go here and it will let you upgrade the version there. So rather than test an older version, I'm going to go ahead and jump to 15.4. Okay, it says it successfully connected. Now I can go ahead and try that same option I had before. So I need to click into the file I was trying to run to see it again. Click on here. I've got the same sorts of options. And if I do run with Databricks Connect, it's going to essentially run the non-Spark things, which isn't very much here. Setting this variable, doing an import, that will run locally, but then all of the Spark work will get shipped up to my Databricks cluster using Spark Connect capabilities. And then the results will be returned back here. So we can see that I ran that. You sort of have to trust that choosing Databricks Connect worked differently. But let's see something cool about using Databricks Connect. If I were to say add a breakpoint right here, and then choose that other option, which is debug current file with Databricks Connect, it's going to go into debug mode, and it's still going to leverage Spark for this part on Databricks. But then I can actually take a look at some of my variables and do some things with it. And so I've got a few variables available. What I like to do typically is jump into my debug console and work with those variables. So let's say I did my own little df.select, just pick a single field like fair amount, and then do a show all the way down here. it's going to run just that command, and I can kind of explore this without having to change the actual code. If I wanted to try and step by step through, I've got my normal options here. We've kept this one simple so you don't get to see the full capabilities, but that's the idea. Okay, so we've seen all the ways we can run a Python file. It's just slightly different for a notebook. So let's take a look at what that is like. Okay, I just copied in a Databricks notebook. Let's take a look at it. Quick thing you'll notice is that we've got now have these run cell options available. And the very first line of a Databricks notebook file when saved this way is going to look like this. Okay, so I've got most of everything I just did in the first cell. If I go back and I choose debug current file with Databricks Connect or run with Databricks Connect, I'll see that I can step through it the same way I would with a file. So let's go ahead and add that breakpoint again. Go ahead and debug, and it's going to get me to this step and then pause. Okay, so just like before, I have some options to work with debug info. I can go ahead and step over, go to the next cell, and so on. If I were to try upload and run file, I'll get a message, and this was true of the old version too, of the extension, is that I cannot do this because it's a notebook. I cannot run it like I would run a file. What I can do though is run it as a workflow again. Remember, in this case, all of this code is shipped up. It's run as a one-time workflow using the all-purpose cluster that I've been assigned to in my extension. And then it'll run, it'll complete, and I can go view that in the UI of the workspace as well. In this case, the time it's taking to synchronize is actually a bit long for how few notebooks and Python files are trying to sync up here. So let me show you why that's happening and how to resolve it. So if you attempt to run files workflow and it's syncing, or anything that starts it to sync and it's taking a really long time, check if your virtual environment is in this same project folder. It probably is. And then make sure it's in your git ignore so it's not syncing. Now when I try it again, it should be okay. Let's confirm that. So we can see in our output Databricks bundle logs, it did show a message that you might have noticed before about uploading bundle files, but it actually got through that quite quickly because we don't have a lot of files to sync anymore. This is actually in a running status quite quickly. My cluster is already running, so it shouldn't take long before this is complete. And there we go. We can see that that notebook worked, similar to how the job worked before. One highlight or note is that it does have some auto-generated text at the beginning that you can just ignore. But as you get down past cell 1, all the other cells will line up with what you would expect to happen here. Okay, so that ran as a workflow. All of this code was shipped up to the cluster and run. We can do the same sort of thing we did earlier, but with Databricks Connect here in the notebook. So I went to debug with a breakpoint set here on line 6, and we'll see it pause for us. I could go in and do some things with these variables, or I can just step over and continue on through this notebook. Okay, now another thing I can do, I can run the full notebook without any debug mode if I want to switch between them. The final thing to show is that I can run a specific cell and it's got a different type of interactive experience. This does require the IPython package, so feel free to install that into your virtual environment. And then we can see it's running cell by cell. I can jump to the next one and do run cell, and it shows me the result there, which is just saying that it happened. And then I've got a magic SQL command here. Hopefully you can make that out. So it's going to use switch to SQL syntax, but as I run it, it does exactly what it's supposed to and prints out the results. Okay, so this is another way to work with your Databricks notebooks here in VS Code. I made some slight changes I don't need to save, so I'll just close that out. Okay, one more type of notebook to look at. It'll be pretty similar, but just worth noting is that I could have a IPython notebook similar to a Jupyter notebook, just a little bit different formatting and magic commands in it. Let's take a look at one of those examples real quick. So we've got our IPython notebook file here. When I come in, I can see it looks a little bit different. Let's go ahead and see what happens if I use this notepad button. I've only got one option for this type of notebook, and it's run on workflow. but there is more we can do with that. Okay, that succeeded. Again, adds cell 1 with a bunch of stuff in it, and then does what we would expect in the other cells, which you can kind of see with the way I'm scrolling. Now, the other way to do this is just to hit the play buttons here and go ahead and tell it you want to use Python environments. Choose that same virtual environment you're already using. And this is going to end up leveraging Databricks Connect to run this. And we know it's using Databricks Connect to run it because it's returning stuff from my Databricks cluster that I wouldn't have in a local PySpark. I wouldn't have this table here locally. And so just like Databricks Connect worked in our file, this is going to work here. And even some of these magic commands are working fine. Okay, so we've had a chance to see how all of these different files work within the VS Code extension. Let's take a look at the newer feature of being able to manage and view your bundles here in the extension as well. So you can see I've got this resource explorer for my bundle, which is blank, and my variables, which is blank. That's because I haven't defined any variables in Databricks.yaml, and I haven't defined any resources yet. One pattern we like to use is to use this include tag and put something like resources star YAML and get everything there. I've got that set up. I added that, but I don't have any resources yet. So let's copy one of those files in. So if I jump over to resources, I have job 1 now, and that led to the bundle automatically determining what resources are available. So it knows now that this notebook task in my job will deploy to a job that is labeled this. If you haven't deployed before, it might look a little bit different. I have deployed and cleaned up a few times here. And so essentially what we've got now is the option to deploy everything in the bundle, which could be multiple jobs. In this case, I've only got one, but I could keep adding to my resources and have multiple jobs. This is an example of doing that deploy. We'll see it doing some upload of the bundle files. Essentially, this is the same as what the synchronize was doing when we tried to run a workflow. Fairly quickly, that completes, and we know that it's there. The other thing I could do is run an individual job. And so this will both deploy and run. It'll check if anything's changed, do any deploy that's needed, and run that job. And so I can go look at these on the workspace and see them, but that's how I can control them from here. And as you start to add variables to your Databricks.yaml, those will show up in your variable explorer. One quick note related to the virtual environment discussion from earlier is that I do have the option to exclude things, exclude different directories of information using the sync exclude option. I think this is the exact syntax, so I've already excluded it through gitignore, so it's not really necessary in this case. So you can go check the docs and see more about how that can work for you. With that, let me show you one last thing, which is I have this running. I do have the option to destroy the bundle from here, which you might want to do after you're done with the feature branch and moving on to other things. What if I got stuck and things were really in a bad state? There's a couple spots I can do some cleanup. This is kind of a last resort, but it does come up. I've seen it like twice. And so just so you know, I can go into this Databricks metadata folder and delete all of my bundle information from here. So I could delete this folder. The other thing I would do is go find out where it's deployed, which is probably going to be under your username for development mode, .bundle, find the bundle name, and I could go and destroy all of this state by moving this to trash. So by destroying both of those things manually, I would expect it to clean up any state that's been saved and give me a fresh start. Okay, and then once this is done running, it'll report back to my VS Code extension. And so if I monitor the terminal here, it's showing me any output that's appropriate to be returned, and it gives me a link directly to that job run. Okay, so that's just a quick glimpse at how we use this, and then all of the concepts of Databricks Asset Bundles that I cover in my CI/CD playlist apply here. So let me quickly cover some key things to know. So all the options to run are under the red Databricks icon now. So that's at the top right. And then some of them won't show if they're not supported by that file type, or there might be grayed out where you can't choose them. So those options are going to be run file as workflow, good for a regular Python file or for a notebook. Upload and run file, which won't work for your notebooks, but will work for your regular Python files. Run with Databricks Connect, which lets us do things like run the full file where part of the code that's not using Spark would happen locally, the other parts will happen on Databricks. And then finally debug with Databricks Connect, which is the option if you've added a breakpoint like I showed in the video, that's what you'd want to use. Now, additional notes, the Python virtual environment is required at the moment. I would recommend a virtual environment anyway. So go ahead and just create a virtual environment and don't get caught up on that concern. The Python version needs to be the same or above for the cluster you use. I haven't really tried to work around this a lot, but basically in order for the side panel of the extension to show you that everything's good, you'll want to match up your Python versions, which I think is a good practice anyway. So 14.3 LTS would be Python 3.10. 15.4 LTS would be Python 3.11. Now, Databricks Asset Bundle configuration is required, but you can keep it where there's no resources, meaning no workflows and things defined, just a very basic bundle YAML that it creates for you if you don't want to use asset bundles at all within your development experience. Now, you'll want to make sure that your gitignore file includes your virtual environment and any other large directory so they don't get synced to your workspace. And so just any large directories, anytime your sync is running slow, take a look at what's in your gitignore. There's also an option within the databricks.yaml, the bundle configuration, to do a sync exclude option. You need to find that in the documentation if you need to do that. So that was my quick list of things you probably want to be aware of. I'm sure other things will pop up in the comments here or in the Databricks community as people find more questions and get them answered. There we go. That was my tour through the VS Code extension with hopefully detailed enough steps on installation. What I used should be pretty helpful to get you going. The documentation is there. You can look at it is an open source library, which means if you do encounter issues, you can file bugs on the GitHub repository. You can look for other bugs that people have filed. Maybe there'll be some workarounds in the comments there. Definitely feel free to leave comments here as you experiment. But if you're finding bugs, if you're finding things that don't work the way you'd like, going to that GitHub repository and putting things there will be much more effective because the team that actually builds and maintains this should be paying attention to that for you. Okay, if you'd like to hear more about working with Databricks, working with other data technologies and what that experience can be like, see demos such as this one, subscribe to this channel, turn on the alerts so that you know when a new one comes out, and just keep an eye on anything else I post that might be related to this. If you wanted to know more about Databricks Asset Bundles, which I highlighted just a little bit here, I have a CI/CD playlist going with kind of my intro, my advanced, and a few special things about running from Azure DevOps. Who knows what'll be coming next? I think probably a bit of a big picture overview of the full developer experience and CI/CD process in as short of a time frame as I can manage, but we'll see what happens next. So thank you for joining me for this session. I hope it was helpful. See you next time.